Hi everyone, my name is Joyce Chow and my group did our project on Erikson's psychoanalytic theory. In our presentation, we will provide an overview of Erikson's stages of development and how our different fields of education relate to Erikson's theory. We will also provide a review of the literature on Erikson's theory, criticisms and limitations to his theory, and final takeaways. Erikson had been a follower of Sigmund Freud, but unlike Freud, who emphasized sexual pleasure of interest in his developmental theory, Erikson stressed the importance of social contexts, including family and culture, on development. Erikson's theory of psychosocial development proposed that human development spans over an entire lifespan. Erikson characterized each stage of life with specific challenges or developmental crises. Freud's theory has 5 psychosocial sexual stages, whereas Erikson's theory has 8 psychosocial stages. These psychosocial stages include trust versus mistrust in infancy, autonomy versus shame and doubt in early childhood between ages 1 to 3, initiative versus guilt in preschool between ages 3 to 6 years, industry versus inferiority in ages 6 to 11 years, identity versus role confusion in adolescence, intimacy versus isolation in young adulthood, generativity versus stagnation in middle adulthood, and integrity versus despair in older adulthood.
So Erikson initially constructed his theory based on his own clinical experience and observations, and since then, other researchers have used his theoretical framework to guide their own empirical research. And so this recent scoping review by Carvalho and Vega from 2022 looked at the available research on Erikson's theory of psychosocial development in adolescence. So a scoping review is meant to synthesize knowledge with the purpose of mapping key concepts, types of evidence, and gaps in research related to a defined area or field. It differs from a systematic review by aiming for a wider breadth of coverage and just really seeing what information is available, but not for exhaustiveness or the quality assessment of the studies. So they were guided by the question, what is the main features of the research on Erikson's psychosocial development in adolescence produced over the last decade, which was 2011 to 2020? And they had 5 research questions. 1, what is the extent of the research? 2, what conceptual definitions are used? 3, what designs and measures are used? 4, what are the main topics and variables studied? And 5, what implications for research and intervention can be suggested? And so this table shows their search strategy. Their inclusion criteria was that studies had to be peer reviewed, published between 2011 and 2020, quantitative or qualitative research. It had to be done in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. It had to be on Erikson's theory and with adolescents. And so this table shows the main features of the final included studies. In all, they had 58 studies total, and the vast majority of them were conducted in North America and Europe, although it was all over the world. We're going to be talking more about main concepts in a bit, but for study design, the vast majority of them, so about 72%, had quantitative designs. 40% were longitudinal, 33% were cross-sectional, and then a smaller number of qualitative studies, literature reviews, mixed methods, and quasi-experimental designs. This is that table continued. It shows the different types of measures that were used in the studies, and then the topics that the studies covered. So in terms of the focus of the studies, the focus of the vast majority of them was on identity. Besides identity, there were 4 other categories of conceptual approaches. The first was psychosocial development. So this was about 13% of studies, and this covered occupational and vocational identity and biological and social dimensions of development. The other conceptual approaches were other stages in adolescence, such as intimacy or generativity, Erikson's ego strengths, and there was 1 study on gifted students specifically, which they didn't really think fit any of the other conceptual approaches. And then of the studies on identity, so about 78% of the studies were on identity, and the authors grouped these into three broad categories. So the first was general identity issues, adolescents navigating psychosocial development. The second was identity formation, and then this was on like identity resolution, identity exploration, and commitment. And then finally, specific identities. So this could be things like ethnic identity, gender identity, and vocational and occupational identity. And they found that the topic of the studies on identity varied widely. So it could be more general, like identity's critical role in adolescents' health and well-being, its relationship with personality features and psychological strengths, the role of parents, present-day challenges like technological advances. But there was really just this wide breadth of topics that was available. And so the authors concluded that this focus on identity reflected Erikson's view that identity development was not a high privilege or a lofty ideal, but a psychological necessity. Most of the studies concurred that identity development was central to subjective and psychological well-being. It was related to less psychopathology, so less depression, anxiety, eating disorders, non-suicidal self-injury, substance use. It was associated with more pro-social behavior, less delinquency, better school adjustment, and better community and social well-being. The authors also found that the studies acknowledged that social realities, like environments and contexts such as being exposed to violence or abuse, being institutionalized, things like that contributed heavily to identity confusion or negative identity. When it came to specific identities, most of the studies were on ethnic identity specifically. They found that ethnic racial identity is indicated to be related to adolescents' identity synthesis, higher self-esteem, lower depressive symptoms, and better grades. Surprisingly, they found that there was only one study that centered gender identity and only one on occupational and vocational identity. So among the specific identities, ethnic identity was the best represented. They found 9 studies on educational issues, and most were more general, and they regarded the positive association between identity development on broad school adjustment outcomes like achievement or connectedness. But there was only one study on the school setting and different pedagogical features that could promote or hinder identity development. And so overall, the authors concluded that there's a clear need for research on the role of psychosocial development settings, such as community, family, peers, and of course, schools.
So, how does Erikson's developmental theory apply to nurse practitioners? As the NP, stages of development must occur for overall success. Much like Erikson's stages of development, nurse practitioners have to master a set of skills and master their position prior to transitioning to the next step. So, when we look at Erikson and the stages of development for nurse practitioners essentially mirror Erikson's developmental stages. So, when we're looking at infancy and trust, a nurse practitioner's stage would be learning the role. In learning the role, it is helpful to see other practitioners in that role, see them in practice, and see how they maneuver their position. And then when we're considering early childhood and autonomy, the nurse practitioner has to establish their own independence. So figuring out how you move in the role, where you're needed, and what is the place for you and other positions of opportunity in the role of a nurse practitioner. When we're looking at preschool and initiative for the nurse practitioner, we're looking at expanding, becoming proficient in one skill set, and then, extending that skill set and thinking about what other things we could do in the future. What other places and spaces should we maintain and hold? And then when we're looking at school age versus industry for the practitioner, we're looking at consolidation. So we're looking at developing our skills, self-regulating within the role through our education and through participating in policy. And then when we're thinking about adolescence and identity, for the nurse practitioner, this is the role of rebellion, or the stage, I should say. So we're establishing oneself as the nurse practitioner and figuring out where we fit in the marketplace. What kind of opportunities are out there outside of being a clinician, being at the bedside, opportunities such as your own practice, mentorship, what else you can do outside in your community, if that is outreach programs, whatever that looks like for that practitioner. And then when we're looking at Erikson's young adulthood and maturity, for the practitioner, we kind of lump those two together in reaching out and in integrity. So at this stage, the nurse practitioner is finding ways to support others in the role of nurse practitioner, and that is through mentorship, nonprofit programs, teaching if you choose to go the route of teaching in academia, but also fostering those practitioners that you see new in the space that maybe you hold, and just lifting them up and helping them find their way and their direction in their careers as they move on as professionals. So,
these next few slides will explore the influence Erikson's theory of psychosocial development has had in the fields of educational and school psychology. Erikson's theory of psychosocial development has been used to understand identity formation within educational settings. Schools are social communities that support the development of students' identities. In particular, these social communities provide students with access to a system of relations that they can build between peers, teachers, coaches, and more. Students' active participation with their school community helps them to begin exploring and constructing their own unique identity. Identity can help to facilitate or inhibit learning. For example, the influence of school image and students' attitudes towards learning can act as a contextual factor related to students' aspirations and engagement in school. What this means is that how students view themselves in relation to their peers can influence how they feel about and engage with school. Finally, teachers play a key role in identity development. Teachers' ability to create a safe environment for students to use their voice and partake in identity exploration activities is a basic condition for students to feel motivated to engage in identity exploration and academic learning constructively. Erikson's theory has also contributed to early childhood education. Firstly, Erikson considered early childhood education to be vital for young children. He identified that challenges faced by young children needed to be addressed for positive development across their lifetime to occur. He also believed that teachers should play an active role in the education of children. In particular, teachers need to assist children in building competencies that support their self-esteem. Erikson's theory has also been used to better understand how adolescents develop a sense of purpose. In particular, the theory has been used as a foundation for defining and operationalizing youth's sense of purpose. Adolescence is a formidable period for youth to explore a sense of purpose. Erikson believed that when youth do not find something to dedicate themselves to, they find it more challenging to acquire motivation belief systems later in life. Additionally, purposelessness has been related to self-absorption, depression, addiction, and other mental health challenges. However, purpose developed during adolescence can lead to prosocial behavior, moral commitment, achievement, and high self-esteem. Finally, Erikson's theory has been linked to teacher identity. In particular, it's been used to help understand and predict the development of early teacher identity. A study used a sample of 109 students in their first year of teacher education qualification at a New Zealand university to examine the development of teacher identity. Participants completed a survey that measured their teacher identity, personal identity, student identity, and ethnic cultural identity. Results from the study showed personal identity development and social identity were significantly associated with higher teacher identity after controlling for several factors such as prior experience working or caring for children, full-time, part-time student status, age, gender, and prior educational qualifications. The study suggested that individuals with a well-formed sense of personal identity were more ready to begin forming their teacher identity, and that these results then provide evidence for the inclusion of identity exploration within teacher education programs.
Hello, everybody. This is Sam Chrisman, and I'm going to be talking about the implications of Erikson's theories for teachers in the classroom environment from the Psychological Development of Children, Implications for Education and Society, Erikson in Context by Sunil Batra. The main age groups that Erikson's theories affect for classroom teachers are preschool, school age, and adolescence, as you can see in the chart here. In the preschool stage, which is identified as the initiative versus guilt stage of Erikson's theories, children will play in a variety of ways and begin to expand their imaginations. This helps them construct a sense of purpose within the world. According to Batra, where the school curriculum allows children to share feelings, express emotions, resolve conflicts, to find a common moral ground, voice ideas, to experiment and to suggest solutions with problems, children develop confidence in their abilities and widen their interests. This provides students with a solid foundation with which to explore their identity. Batra also states a properly thought out educational curriculum can contribute significantly to the need for addressing the vital aspects that enable the development of purpose and action in young children. Not providing a curriculum that allows exploration of purpose can hinder the development of self in children. The next stage I want to talk about is the school age, or where industry versus inferiority for Erikson's theory. At this point in development, children begin to make use of the skills and tools they have acquired. This helps with role identity as they explore, they begin to identify the role that they fit in society. If they're unable to use this tool or skill effectively, they may lose interest in an associated role with that tool or skill. Batra determines the tools that are generated and refined during the stage of industry development may emerge from curricular experiences that include sports, writing, theater, scientific experimentation, research, coordination, and organization of school programs. So as teachers, we can provide a multitude of these opportunities to allow students to explore those tools and find out which best fit their identity. The final age range that I'd like to talk about today is the adolescence age range, or identity versus role confusion. Once students have determined their set of skills and tools, they can begin to find their identity in society at large. Batra suggests the development of the individual identity, until recently dependent on the family and educational institutions, is now increasingly shaped by the choices that a young person makes to determine her emerging place in society, one that establishes him or her as a person who has the power to, in turn, influence society. The strengths acquired in the previous stages, together with the choices that young people make in the coming stages, determine their pathways for higher education, vocation, and employability, and their readiness to engage with the significant other. Teachers in this stage can help students by exposing them to and preparing them for a variety of pathways that will help them use their skills and tools effectively. So now that we've established the age ranges, we're going to talk about identifying roles as a student. During adolescence, students attempt to determine their role as defined by a connection to and separation from their parents and peers. In the role of generations in identity formation, Erikson speaks to teachers of adolescence. Hammond and Hendricks posit that Erikson believed for an identity to be truly viable, it must confer both a sense of uniqueness and simultaneously provide a sense of unity or sameness. In order to achieve a sense of uniqueness, adolescents must define themselves as distinct from parents and peers, not merely as extensions of them. This is important for teachers to understand because teachers must learn to help students balance a desire to fit in while also wanting to define themselves separately from those around them. As they begin to do this, they become more individual and they take on characteristics that are more identified with them rather than those around them. Sanctioning role exploration. Teachers can sanction adolescent exploration of societal roles by allowing students the opportunity to determine what they do well and what they don't do well. Hammond and Hendricks state, by sanctioning capabilities in adolescence, teachers communicate to them that their talents and potential have been noticed and are valuable in the adult world. This encourages further exploration of identity as it relates to those talents, giving confidence in their exploration. Teachers can validate an adolescent's sense of belonging in the adult world by allowing them to explore their talents and by pointing out what they're good at. Finally, identity-safe environments. Erikson stated that it is especially important for adults to tolerate public displays, fluctuations, growth, experimentation, and peer cliques, because it is through this type of activity and experimentation that adolescents learn from future adult roles. Further, creating classroom environments where students may become active learners is important from a practical standpoint, because it may enhance students' learning. Hammond and Hendricks suggest that teachers can help develop this by allowing students to explore and also rebel from known characteristics. This helps students to decide which traits best serve them and which are not compatible with our identity. This is especially important during the adolescent stage because as students prepare to enter the adult world, they must have an understanding of their role and how they will fit into society. Thank you guys for listening to this part of the presentation, and I will hand it off to the next group member.
Hi everyone, my name is Tay Murray and I'm going to be wrapping up this presentation today. Criticisms and limitations of Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. I think the first one is that these stages can occur more than once. Individuals may revisit or re-encounter developmental challenges multiple times throughout their lives, rather than progressing through these stages linearly. For example, a person may struggle with the lack of trust beyond just the infancy, or struggle with establishing intimacy in relationships past that age of 39 years old. Looking at the next one would be the criticism of assuming the completion of one stage as a prerequisite for the next. I think the idea that successful resolution of one stage is necessary before moving on to the next, implying that development may not be sequel or dependent as Erikson proposed. The focus on social expectations and cultural specificity. Erikson's theory is often criticized for being rooted in Western cultural norms and not accounted for in variations in development across different cultures. Now looking at a few more criticisms, the gender bias and vagueness. Some critics argue that Erikson's theory focuses more on male experiences and kind of lacks that perspective from the female side. The final one is the neglect of adulthood. Critics note that Erikson's theory places disproportionate emphasis on the childhood and adolescent stage, neglecting the challenges and developmental tasks of adulthood. Looking at some conclusions and takeaways from this presentation, I think firstly, Erikson's stages emphasize family and culture, not sexual urges. It recognizes the adult development with 3 stages after adolescence. Erikson's theory was based on clinical experience and observations, and research on Erikson's theory is still emerging today around us. Now, taking a look at the study spoken about before from Carvalho and Vega in 2022, 79% of these studies focus on identity, being categorized as gender identity issues, identity formation, and specific identities. And they were finding that topics on identity, they varied widely. 13% of this was on psychosocial development, and other stages included adolescent, ego strengths, and gifted students. Some more key conclusions from looking into the theory and literature was Erikson thought of identity development not as a high privilege or lofty ideals, but as psychological necessity. I think another key conclusion is that social realities, the environments and contexts that contribute to identity confusion or negative identity is a key takeaway from this. And also that from the study, 9 studies on educational issues, with most being very general, only 1 on that school setting, shows that there's a clear need for research on the role of psychosocial settings. Now looking at Tiffany's slides on nurse practitioners, I think some key takeaways here is the fact that to master a set of skills in their position prior to transitioning to the next step is a key correlation. And also the stages of development for nurse practitioners, especially, they kind of essentially mirror Erikson's stage of development. Now moving on to Dana's point with educational and school psychology. Erikson's theory of psychosocial development has been used to understand the identity formation within educational settings. Students who actively participate in their school community allow for them to begin exploring and constructing their own unique identity. However, students view themselves in relations to their peers will affect how they interact within the school. Kind of moving on, looking at Erikson's theory contributing to early childhood education, challenges that young children face needing to be addressed for positive development across their whole lifetime. Some other key points was that Erikson believed that if the youth do not find something to dedicate themselves to, then they find it harder to acquire motivation belief systems later on in their life. This can lead to many challenges, including selflessness, depression, addiction, and other mental health challenges. Erikson's theory also was linked to teacher identity, as explained in more detail through the study conducted in New Zealand through the New Zealand universities that Dana spoke about. Lastly, looking at Sam's slides on classroom teachers, the age ranges of Erikson's theory that apply here is the preschool, school age, and adolescent age brackets. And a key point that was brought up was identifying roles as a student, the connection to and separation from peers and parents, which I think is quite interesting. Erikson believed that for an identity to be truly viable, it must confer both a sense of uniqueness and simultaneously provide a sense of unity or sameness. Adolescents must see themselves as distinct from their parents and peers, not extensions of them. Teachers must help with the balance and a desire to fit in, whilst also trying to establish themselves within society and their school environment. Role exploration. Teachers can communicate with students that their talents have been recognized and valuable in the real world, and this will kind of encourage further exploration of identity, giving them confidence in their exploration. And lastly, a key point that Sam brought up was the identity of safe environments. Teachers can help develop students as they provide environments which the students can explore and rebel from known characteristics, which is going to be important for them during that adolescent stage. Thank you very much for listening to our presentation, and we really appreciate your time and feedback.